Well, David, what did you learn about yourself in this process that you were able to apply dramatically? Because obviously infidelity, adultery and jealousy are great stuff of drama.
Yes, yeah.
This is good material.
Yeah, it wasn't so easy to live, but no.
But in terms of what you put down on the page, what did you learn?
Well, I always try to be truthful. If there's a character vaguely like myself in the play, I'll try and be as honest with his faults and foibles as anyone else in the play. I think when I sat down to write characters, I had to investigate my own weaknesses and faults. I suppose, as you said, it might be a form of therapy in a way, but I didn't find it like that. I just found, well, look, if I'm poking fun at other people, I better be prepared to do it to myself.
I guess I'm just interested in the history of jealousy and adultery in theatre, and about, this is a theme where really it's the same old story every time, and yet we go back to it time and time again, presumably because it is such a kind of a facet of human nature. But what is there new to say about adultery, do you think, as a dramatist? I mean, being completely objective about it.
Well, there's nothing new to say about revenge, about all the other powerful emotions, but they just keep happening to human beings, and they're the stuff, they really are the stuff of drama, those base emotions, revenge, rejection, anger, fear, disappointment, jostling for status, all of that. As long as people still have a hunger for stories, that will be the basis of those stories.
But then there is also the wider arena, and you've just finished working on Balabow, haven't you?
Yeah.
So would you like to say something about that, story?
Well, I have always worked in film as well as stage, but it's a different arena. On stage, I write comedy, sometimes veering towards satirical. A full-on satirist is vicious to his characters, but I don't think I've ever been vicious. I'm more in the comedy area where you see people's foibles but still see them as worthwhile human beings. Whereas in film, in a sense, you're working to someone else's project in someone else's tone, and you just use your skills to... mind you, I do like still a little bit of comedy in film if I work on it, but Balabow is a very serious subject.
And I was hoping that you would say something about the film, in fact, and about why that story means something to you and why you wanted to do this.
Well, it's always been in the consciousness of Australians. There seemed to be something particularly brutal about 5 journalists just being slaughtered because they happened to see an illegal invasion of East Timor. But the other awful thing was how our government, in collaboration with the Indonesian government, tried to pretend it was an accident. It was a cover-up. It was a horrible cover-up, and you don't feel proud of your own government when they collude to stop an international incident. They pretend that the journalists were caught in crossfire.
Particularly if it's a government that you were supporting at the time. So it's very disillusioning for you as a writer. Presumably when you're looking at that material, you're revisiting your allegiance to that government as well.
Yes. Well, within seconds of it happening, the radio intercepts in Darwin had picked up the fact that they were murdered. So our government knew straight away they were murdered, but they try to diffuse it for years and years and years.
So it's an important story to be telling. Let's go back into the realm of fiction, and possibly a little bit close to the bone in terms of the sea change chapter of your life, Dog's Head Bay. Now, on this project, you, Kristin, were working as David's researcher and collaborator, and you were fleshing out the female characters. Why was this such a dog of a production?
I think it was naivety on our part. We didn't know that as co-producers we would have to have a certain budget. And it was the ABC. We thought, well, they won't let us go into this unless we've got enough money, will they? But it was being made... we didn't know anything about sea change. That was such a successful and terrific series, but we wrote this sort of before Sea Change, and then we were sort of horrified to find that, oh gosh, they've already got one. Oh, well, they won't want ours. They said, no, we'll have yours. Yours will be a much lower budget. And we're right. And it was 13 parts, half-hour parts, and the budget was cut to nothing. I mean, we had no idea that we shouldn't have even tried to make it. So we had mad things like cameramen who were too short were standing on built-up shoes on soles so they could be high enough to get the shots. The actors had to sort of work around the cameraman instead of the other way around. I think Philip Adams did a very funny, cruel review that was accurate. He said, this is right back to the 50s. You should really watch this series on a 17-inch black and white television with a TV dinner on your lap.
Well, yes, our leading lady was tall, so the short guys had to put on the high heel boots, but they wobbled too much for the camera, so they had to put the camera on stilts, and the actors had to move around the camera rather than.
No, it was a sort of wobble cam thing.
And they didn't have enough money to change the lighting, so morning looked exactly the same as noon, and the sets were cardboard and.
Yes, the furniture looked like it was sort of sub-IKEA.
Terrible. And I used to beg for some exterior shots so that we could establish where we were. No, we can't afford those. No.
It was a full nightmare. They shot 26 minutes in one day.
Yes, which is unprecedented. I mean, it's unheard of to do that. And so when you're living that nightmare, first of all, when you were making it, presumably you knew, did you, when you were making it, that it was going to be bad? Did you?
Oh, no, we didn't. We thought, the scripts we thought were good. The actors loved the scripts. The director, Simon Phillips, who's a theatre director and inexperienced, so that was another foolish mistake on our part.
I still believe the concept was a good one. I mean, we were puncturing the myth of egalitarian Australia. In fact, the Sanderinis next door were earning, he was a criminal lawyer who was earning 100 times as much as the poor couple next door, and yet they had to pretend they were just good Aussie mates.
Exactly.
And,
The boat builder was really on the skids. They were lovely acting and terrific. There was a great feeling on set. People were very delighted with what they were saying and doing.
So when it went to executives, when it went to the ABC and they looked at it, did they look gloomy?
Yes. I remember Jeff Portman looking at the production values and he came to me once and said, David, the scripts are good, but look, you cannot sort of have these sort of production values. People just go, and then they did. But as I said, I thought it was Australia had moved from being the most egalitarian country in the world in the 60s in terms of income spread to the third least egalitarian Western country by the time we made, and I thought that's, by the time we made the series, I thought that's a satirical point. This Australian mateship is bullshit. We're one of the worst countries in the world for inequality, and that was meant. If it had been done properly, I still think it would have been fairly hard hitting.
And it was funny. I mean, everyone on set was in absolute paroxysms of laughter. All the crew, everybody, because the actors were very funny, and Simon directed them beautifully. And we couldn't believe it just looked so awful when it was final product.
And the actors were off in the distance because they had to move up to the camera.
Well, I mean, this is alien territory, I would imagine, for you in your career, in the sense that really is something that one can really only categorise as a failure, I think. I mean, the scripts may have been good, but overall, it was a failure. And I think one of the things that we don't do enough is talk about failure as the laboratory for success. It's how you deal with failure that allows you to move on and learn something from an experience, which, presumably in your case was we're never doing television drama again like that. But can you just say something about failure and about how useful it can be to have, however painful, how useful it can be to understand why something goes wrong? Both of you.
Oh, we knew fairly early in that we were totally under budgeted and everything was looking tacky. So it wasn't surprising in a sense. The surprising thing was that the ratings were quite good, and the ABC nearly commissioned a second series. They're on the verge of commissioning because the figures were okay, and we were stuck by contract. We would have had to do another 13.
We were just so grateful.
I think it was relief.
When the critics pounced on it.
Yeah, I mean, if they'd given us a decent budget, it would have been a different story. I think it would have been quite terrific.
Well, there you are. So you're grateful to the critics once for
always.
rubbishing your work.
Yes, very grateful.
One of the things that comes out in the book, Kristin, obviously, is that in the life that you've led, you've met an awful lot of very well-known people, whether it's inviting Prime Minister Keating to dinner or mixing with people in Hollywood, including Mick Jagger. So I'm just wondering whether at any stage anyone has ever made you feel genuinely starstruck.
I thought Mick Jagger was pretty good.
I put him on the list straight away.
Yeah, starstruck. I don't know. Robert Altman was a wonderful man as a director, and he was a maverick, and he was just a very impressive person. I remember once his wonderful film, oh God, which one is it?
Shortcuts.
Shortcuts, yes. Shortcuts, we were in New York, and he said, David, come over, David and Kristin, come and we want you to look at this thing, and I'm going to be sitting in the back of the way watching your body language. And if you slump, I'll know that's a slow bit. And so he had a group of friends there, I don't know, 12 or so, gave us all flagon wine. It was in a loft. Lots of flagon wine and some bread and cheese. It was very sort of 70s, although it was the 90s. And he sat us all down, and he stood at the back the whole 3 hours.
And we were going.
We were going. But it was so good. We really didn't have to act. It was marvellous.
Yeah.
And he didn't know where to cut it. But he was just a terrific, funny guy.
And you worked on a film with him that never got made, but
Yes.
it seems that the experience of working with Altman was so pleasurable that in a way it was an end in itself. And this was a film about Mata Hari.
Mata Hari, the supposed super spy who really wasn't. She was a scapegoat. She was a rather silly woman and wasn't really a spy, but the French had to find someone to explain their disastrous performance in World War I, and so she got shot. It was a sad story in a way, because she was a woman totally out of her depth. She did sleep with German officers. She also slept with French officers. She made no distinction between the two, but there you go.
Didn't talk politics.
Didn't talk politics.
Didn't talk politics. No. Well, talking of talking politics, you've known Gough Whitlam, you've known Paul Keating. What do you make of Kevin Rudd?
Well, look.
Boy, this is going to turn out to be the toughest question of the day.
Yeah. No, you have to be a little bit worried at his reaction to the Henson photos and stuff like that. I do. I still do believe, in general, there's a greater commitment to fairness and equity in any Labor government than there is in a Conservative government, no matter how muted. There's still a tendency to be a little fairer, and so I'd prefer them to be in office. But I think he's hit a horrendous time, and what a time to come into office when the world's going down the tubes.
Kristin, I get the impression from your book that, in a sense, you've been responsible for a little bit of consciousness raising when it comes to David, that he was possibly less concerned with some of the social justice issues that you were concerned with, in fact often complained to you that you were giving away too much money to various good causes. So would you like to say something about how you perceive that kind of evolution in the relationship or the role that you've played there?
Goodness, this is dicey. No, I think early on, things like Aboriginal affairs, he had a fairly narrow interest, I guess, and he's broadened tremendously, including, I used to take him on terrible trips that he didn't really enjoy, like
doesn't like being
South
uncomfortable,
America.
doesn't like spiders, doesn't like anywhere kind of...
Poor thing, but he was
Well, when
he was very
you're
brave.
6'7.5", you try and sleep in a Peruvian hotel bed. I can tell you
Lucky
what.
you've got a hotel.
Well, where was it? Where you
Oh,
took
no,
us?
this
Oh,
was
shocking.
a sort of
Yeah.
camp on the Amazon.
A camp on the Amazon, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't like the piranhas, did you?
No, or the anacondas.
No,
Or the big tarantulas that walked over water towards you in the canoe. Right? Yeah.
But it was very
I'm a
exciting.
coward, basically.
No, but then I'd often hear him boasting about all this excitement when he got back. He was okay. But yes, it wasn't very pleasant for him. But when we would go to a country like Peru, like Lima or somewhere, and there'd be student demonstrations, and because of the journalism, I suppose, I'd be very interested. I'd want to get out there and photograph them and perhaps use it later. But just find out about the people and what was really happening. David's idea was you stayed behind and you had a pisco sour in the lounge and you read a book about the Spanish Inquisition, perhaps, but you didn't get out there and mix it with those crazy people. And so we differed in that way. But
Kristen's idea was, oh, look, there's a tank. Isn't that interesting? Let's go and see. Yeah.
he used to be very upset. Once we even went on holiday with the children to Vanuatu, and that was going to be nice and quiet and peaceful. And I suddenly discovered there was a sort of revolutionary leader in jail, and I thought, oh, I'll just catch the bus into town and get an interview. And he was furious because this is the family holiday. And so I had to stop, and I did a bit. But no, he broadened in all kinds of areas, not just politics and third world and interest in women's issues, I think. Yeah.
Listen,
Go on, fight back. Come on.
I was so radical when I was a teenager. I have actually smoothed down a little and become more conservative over the years. I was a strident radical in my high school years and in my university years. All right, I was an engineering student, but...
Because
Flower bombs
you do admit on many occasions you've written about and you've admitted in interviews and speeches and things to rampant materialism, and you've had characters in your plays who've sort of confessed to their rampant materialism. So what are the social issues that you care about at the moment? What's uppermost in your mind as a cause that you feel passionately about?
Well, you can't help feeling passionate about the enormous inequality in the world as a whole. I mean, inequality between nations, inequality between people in those nations. I think the economic rationalist miracle that our Murdoch press keeps trumpeting, that has brought wealth and prosperity to us all, in fact, yes, it's created a mild middle class in some countries, but the disparity between wealth and poverty has actually got worse over the last 30 years. I think the big issues are still important.
Before I ask for the house lights to come up and turn to the audience for some questions from you, I also wanted to ask you something that I was very curious about. I've been watching Underbelly, like most of the nation, for the last few weeks, and I was curious about what you think the appetite for that series and that sort of flagrant kind of display of violence and everything that went with it shows us about the way we're constructing our myths today, and whether there's anything about the way we're constructing our myths today that's different from the way we've been doing it for the last 200 years in terms of our fascination with criminals.
Well, our fascination with criminals is, I think, they're just more obvious examples of the need for power, status, and money than the rest of the population. They don't bother hiding it. I mean, what my comedies do is see the same basic motivations, the jostling for status, the jostling for power, but they do it verbally in the middle class, whereas that class, they go for it. You don't take an insult at a dinner party and just counter insult. You get out your gun and
Have you wanted to do that?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, shall we have the house lights up and maybe some questions from the audience?
Did you have to deal with restraint a lot, and did you have a way you went about dealing with that?
Did everybody hear the question at the back? The gentleman was asking a question of Kristin about whether she had to deal with restraint or whether she had to exercise any restraint because it's so hard when you're writing a biography of someone that you know and live with so intimately.
Well, I think David, when he heard I was going to write it, was quite relieved because he thought I wouldn't have to ask him any questions because he thought, you know the answers to all those things interviewers ask. So I said there might be a few different questions and he was a bit worried. But what I tried to do was to get under the surface without making it too painful, to bring out the things I loved in him, you know, his wit and his intellect and his larrikinism, as well as to talk about the whole career and his work. And I also think how did I go about it? I knew I couldn't be entirely objective because, I was too close. But I certainly tried, and the skills I'd learned as an investigative journalist were very helpful, so that I could just pretend he was the subject and not in any relation. I managed to get through that.
The question was about restraint.
Restraint?
There wasn't any.
Oh, no restraint. Oh, sorry, yes. Restraint. Yes, well, there's a lot that's not in the book, I have to say. Certainly, I was restrained up to a point. But as we got into it, and I wouldn't just spring it on me and say, I'm going to write this. We'd discuss it, and I'd think, this should be in the book, I think. What do you think? So in that sense, there was restraint. He might have said, no, I don't think it should be in. But he never pulled back. He was brave enough to allow me
When I looked aghast and said, does this have to go into the book? You could see her eyes light up. And,
No, I was exaggerating.
What's David like when he's in writing mode? I mean, one of the things we know about him is that he's fantastically prolific and can turn out a play in, I don't know what it is, one every 12 or 18 months. So when he's in writing mode, are there rules in the house about silence in the morning? Does he become anxious? Does he become distant? What's he like?
Oh, totally obsessed. I'm always very wary. I mean, we work working fairly far apart, so I don't cross him when he's distracted, that's it. And we meet for lunch and we hardly speak if we're both working on something. But yes, he has to be left alone, and that was part of the difficulty with this book. He was busy all the time, so I didn't want to. I don't think I ever sat down and said, like we are now, probingly. I had to catch him on the run, more or less.
Right.
It wasn't sitting down talking.
I got to the point where I was trying to hide around the house.
You did.
Here she comes. Oh, yeah.
You have three plays, which I always view as being quite distinct and different from the others. Face-to-face conversation and charitable intent. I understand that they're different in that they're underpinned by the transformative mediation model, in particular face-to-face. Did you collaborate and cooperate much as a couple on those? Because I realise that draws on part on your skill base.
Did everybody at the back hear the question? The question was about the three plays that David has written which are based on the process of transformative mediation and whether there was a process of collaboration between David and Kristin on those plays.
No. It was absolutely his.
But I did collaborate with the people who are working in the field. They were terrific to me. As soon as I saw the process working, I thought it's wonderful, it's dramatic and it's humane, and it's a better way of solving conflict than anything else I've ever seen, and I think it remains so. So I was motivated to write about it. Those plays were much more in the area of realism than my comedies, so you're right, they are a different genre.
Yes, there's a question at the back. There are two questions at the back, but we'll take the question from the lady behind the lady who I think is in red. Sorry, I can hardly see, but there's someone, yes, behind you. Yes, in green. Sorry.
David, as a fellow tall person, I was interested in whether your height has changed the way you view the world.
How would he know?
Yes, I look down on it. No, it's a serious question. Yes, I felt acutely sensitive to my excessive height when I was a schoolboy. I was a foot taller than anyone else in the grade, and people don't feel entitled to tease short people, but anyone who's tall, it's what's the weather like up there, or how are things going, Lofty, and so yes, I felt very conspicuous, and I used to have shortness fantasies that I was really short.
The best story that you tell about height, though, I think in the book, is the story about driving in Italy. Kristin, do you want to just describe the scene?
Well, in Italy, it was a wonderful advantage to be so tall because we had a Fiat 500, a Bambino, a very little one we hired, and David's head could stick up out the top, a bit like a horse in a float. So he could drive like this, and it had a little sunroof, and it was very handy, but it didn't save him from being abused by the Roman drivers going around the Colosseum 8 times because he couldn't get off the thing, and they'd say, "Buffono!"
One final question to you both. It's a completely trivial thing, but I just can't help being fascinated by nicknames, particularly nicknames within couples. I'm always intrigued by what people call each other, and you two call each other Puss. You both have the same nicknames, and you've put that in the book. Yes. You didn't have to put that in the book.
I suppose not. It's very unimaginative, isn't it? I think you started calling me that.
Yes,
didn't you?
yes, and so you started calling me Big Puss.
That's not in the book.
No.
That's not in the book. No.
Yes, a very unfortunate choice that's always given our children great hilarity, but yeah.
Well, I think we better leave it there, but please thank Kristin and David for a very candid hour.